Hi guys. After I uploaded my video a few days ago about the FPL, I got a lot of responses saying, "Hey John, can you talk about the new EVF?" And that's totally understandable because I think that that's probably the most exciting component of the FP ecosystem that's been released this year, and that's including the FPL. So what I want to do in this video is to talk about my first initial reaction to it and the things I think you need to take in consideration if you're thinking about buying one. Not necessarily performance testing it. We'll do that out in the field in a follow-up video where we'll look at things like how much battery drainage does it take, how does it act on the FP versus the FPL, blackouts, things of that nature. So the first thing I think you need to consider is cost. Like all Sigma accessories, they're expensive. And as of today, it's about $700 for the EVF-11. Holy uncles, that's a lot of money. I mean, seriously, think about the things you can buy for $700. You can buy a new lens. You can buy lights. You could feed your family. You can keep the power on in your house. Or you can buy forgiveness flowers when your wife finds out you just spent $700 on an EVF.
What?
Now, it is cheaper if you buy it with a kit. You save about $200. But at the end of the day, you need to decide if this is important for you. Is it really the best way to spend your money, best way to spend $700? For me, it made sense because I already made a big investment in purchasing the FP and then the FPL. I've got I-Series glass, and I could save the $200. So it just made sense to go ahead and pull the trigger on it. So continuing on with the specs, it's 3.68 million dots of resolution on a 1/2-inch OLED display. And that's pretty much puts it in the middle of the pack with what's out there today. If you look at the cameras today, most of your Canons, your mid-range Sonys, the Nikon Zs, or as we say in the United States, Nikon Zs, they're all in about that 3.6, 3.8 million dots of resolution. And it is a bright EVF. It really is. It's a good EVF. The problem is that for $700, you could argue, and I wouldn't disagree with you, that it should be more Leica-like. Right? You look at Leica or the high-end Sonys, they're pushing 5 million plus in resolution. And for $700, you can make a pretty sound argument that you should be getting better than just industry standard. But it is a good display. It's got industry standard, keeps up with pretty much most of the cameras that are out there today. It's bright, it works fine. So let's talk about build quality. When you buy it, you're going to get it in a soft case, you're going to get the EVF, and then you're going to get this eye cup here, which is actually super comfortable. It's really soft, and more than likely you're going to want to put that on there. In terms of addressing how good is it in terms of build quality, I mean, it feels really good, but it's, EVFs are so light, it's hard to tell. And really, we just need more data, right? We need several months of people working with it, articulating the viewfinder back and forth, disconnecting it from the camera several times, using the switches to see if actually anything breaks, and hopefully it doesn't. I'm just relying on the fact that it feels really good. And, honestly, Sigma for the last couple of decades has really built solid products. I mean, their products tend to go way and above beyond what they need to. They don't skimp on materials. They're built to run trucks over sometimes. So I've got no concerns about the build quality of the EVF itself. Let's talk about attaching it. Now, some people say that it's very fidgety. And it is and it isn't, right? If you own an FP like I do, and you have the hot shoe adapter and you put cables in, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's those rubber doors, right? That's what makes it fidgety to put on. So when you actually go to attach it to the FP or FPL, the first thing you have to do is to take out the HDMI door, which is a little rubber tab, and there's conveniently a little spot to hold it right inside the EVF. That was pretty smart. Now here's the problem, and that is that the USB and the headphone jack, that door does not come off. It simply hangs. Now, that's a conscious decision, I believe, by Sigma to make sure that the door wouldn't be lost and that you'd end up having an open port to the elements, which would be a bad thing. So what it does do, though, is that little rubber door pushes back against the EVF when you're trying to put it on. So the trick is, and it does get easier as the door is a little more worn in, is that you have to peel the door back and then hold it with your finger. And you'll see that underneath the EVF is a little slot, and that's where that door goes into it. Line it up, rock it back and forth, and then you can screw it in. And once it's screwed in, it's rock solid. It's not going anywhere. And this brings us to the third concern that I have with this EVF, if you're going to purchase it. Once you attach it and look at the side, you're going to see doors for the USB and for your headphones. And then underneath here, it's a little bit of a pain, but there is the door for the microphone. What you don't see is the HDMI, because the HDMI is what's actually powering and driving the EVF, which means if you want to use this for video and you thought you were going to use this as an electronic loop and then attach a monitor on it so that you'd have a bigger frame or that people could see what you're recording, you got a problem. This isn't going to work, right? There is no other port out on this. So unfortunately, by putting this in on the side like this, it takes the only port out and uses it for the EVF. Now, as a photographer, this doesn't bother me at all because I'll never have a monitor attached when I'm doing photography. If I'm doing video, I will have a monitor attached. And if I need to have a loop, I actually still have the previous loop from the FP that I can use. But if you thought you can use this as an electronic loop, unfortunately, it's not going to work for you. Now, what's nice is they actually put the diopter inside of the eye cup. So that actually protects it from being accidentally hit, and it actually protects it from the elements a little bit. So that was actually a nice design. I like that. And that brings me to my fourth concern, which is ergonomics. If you purchased the FP to have a small camera, the FPL, well, this adds actually a substantial amount of size to it. It makes it as large as many of the cameras that are out there today. Now, Hugh Brownstone from Three Blind Men and an Elephant, which is a great channel, and I agree as well, he wanted to have this in the middle, right? Kind of like you traditionally see on the cameras. But there really isn't any real estate for it up here, and you got the heat sinks, and it just wouldn't happen. So this is really the logical places on the side. But it does change the profile of the camera considerably. Now, if you like to have a little more grip, it's actually a good thing because you can grip it with both hands, and there's this logical spot where you don't have to put your thumbs all over the LCD or put your fingers on the lens, and that's a good thing. But if you're looking for small, obviously it's going to change a little bit. And one of the things that I do like is that this does create a rangefinder style of camera. In fact, I call it a hybrid rangefinder. I'll show you why in a minute, which is typical, right? Sigma does everything a little bit different. But it is like a rangefinder, and I love rangefinders because I'm right eye dominant, and I can put this in. I can see my subject with my left eye. I can see the monitor or the EVF through the right eye, and it's fantastic. Now, if you're not right eye dominant, let's say you're predominantly left eye, and that's uncomfortable for you, normally it's a problem with rangefinders because you see people, they squish their face against the glass, right? Because when you look straight on, your nose crushes against the screen. So they kind of do this little tilt thing to get in there. But the difference with the Sigma is look how deep that eyepiece is. There is a huge amount between here and the end of the eye cup. And so even though I've got a decent sized nose, I can put this in, and I very little have to do tilting, and it's not a problem. And if I want a little more space, I just tilt it down a little bit, and now I've got even more space. So if you are left eye dominant, or you prefer having the camera right center in the middle, you can still use your left eye, and there's no problem because of that depth. And so this brings us to the point that the EVF has a 90-degree tilt. Hell yes, right? That is a beautiful feature. You can put this thing right on the ground, be able to see without having to get flat on the ground, looking sideways, trying to shield the LCD in the middle of the sunlight. You'll be able to look straight down in and see your subject, no problem at all. And interestingly, it creates this hybrid experience because yes, it's a rangefinder, and I'm going to do this dominant eye thing, right? And when you have the rangefinders and look straight forward, out of my left eye, I see the subject. Out of my right eye, I see the monitor. And of course, it has a duplication of the subject. So it's a little ghosty, but it's all there. And that's great. And then what I found is that when I was out there shooting, I was actually doing this. It's a slight tilt. And I wasn't really conscious as to why I was doing it until I started thinking about it. And the reason I was doing it is that when you bring that slight tilt down, what happens, put the side here for you can see. So here's my subject, here's the EVF, right? So when I do a slight tilt, it actually drops the EVF down a little bit. So now when I look out at the subject with my left eye, I really see nothing in my right eye because, yeah, there's a little thing in the peripheral in the bottom, but it's pretty much black up here. So I see the subject really clear. And then when I want to see the EVF, I take a quick look down and I see the EVF, my subject disappears. And it gives me this really separation with all I have to do is look up and down, and I get a complete separation between subject and the EVF, which is, I didn't realize I was consciously doing it, but it was actually pretty cool. It may not be for everyone, but it worked out pretty well for me. And the last point to consider is an inconvenience and probably a negative, and that is that it doesn't have an eye sensor. So if you use a current camera, like my Fuji's, right? Fuji has an eye sensor, so it knows in the eye cup when you put your eye up next to it. And that allows you to do things like have the LCD on when my eye is away, but when I put my eye to the EVF, the LCD turns off, EVF turns on. Or I can just black out the LCD altogether and just use the EVF, and it only turns on when my eye's there. That saves battery life and probably saves some life on the EVF as well. Unfortunately, there is no eye sensor on this EVF, and it is a manual process to switch between the EVF and the LCD, which means it's always on or it's always off. And I can't tell you the amount of times that I've been out shooting and I raise it up thinking that it's going to turn on because I'm so used to that and trained to that with my other cameras. It's like, what's going on? And it's like LCD, oh, I got to hit the switch. It's just clumsy. It's not really a big issue, but it's clumsy. But the fact that it stays on all the time, unless you flip off and turn it on the LCD, it probably is going to burn some battery life. I just don't know how much yet, but we'll find that when we go to test it into the field. So let's wrap up with our kind of quick pros and cons of this initial review, right? The first is we got an EVF. Hooray, right? I mean, that's great. We wanted that modular EVF. And it is a industry standard resolution. It's just as good as most of the cameras that are out there today. It's bright. The Doppler is hidden in the eye cup, and so it's protected from accidentally bumping it and from the elements. You get that larger grip if you like the larger grip. You get the rangefinder style, which I personally love, but even if you're not right eye dominant or don't want to use the rangefinder, it's far enough away where even the left eye person could still use it. And that EVF tilts full 90 degrees, which is fantastic. Now, some of the cons, well, obviously first is cost. $700 is a lot of money. And given that much money, although it is a good EVF, you would expect that the resolution would probably be more on par, honestly, with like a Leica. I think we are deserving of at least 5 million plus on this EVF, to be honest with you. It's no HDMI port. Right. So once you click at it, you can't run this as an electronic loop and also run a monitor off to the side. There's no eye sensor. You have to do a manual switch if you want to switch from the EVF to the LCD and back and forth, and it's always on. So it's going to drain some battery life. So hopefully this initial review has given you some food for thought and some things to consider before you go out and buy this EVF. I think it's a great EVF, but it is expensive and it does have its quirkiness. So in future videos, we're going to look at the performance aspects of this EVF. We'll look at things like blackout and lag time, and is there any difference between the FP and the FPL? It should be fun, so hopefully you guys join me, and I'll see you then. Thanks.